I was standing in my living room, looking at my furniture the way a person looks at something they've already decided belongs to them. Not rude about it. That was the thing. My daughter-in-law was never rude. She had a way of being dismissive that looked, from the outside, almost like kindness. She tilted her head at my old oak sideboard, the one my husband and I bought at an estate sale in 1987, and she said, "We could probably find you something more modern, something easier to dust." Then she smiled at me, and I said thank you. That was 2 years ago. I should have said something then. I know that now. But at 68, when you spent your whole life being the kind of woman who keeps the peace, the habit is deep. You say thank you when someone insults your furniture. You say thank you when someone implies you can't manage your own home. You make tea. You offer the good cookies. You sit down and you make yourself small because somewhere along the way, you learned that was the price of being loved. I'd been paying that price for 2 years by the time my son sat across from me at my own kitchen table and said what he said. He wasn't cruel about it either. That was the part that stayed with me longest. He genuinely believed he was helping. "Mom," he said. He had his hands wrapped around his mug, which I'd filled twice already, because that's what I do. "We've been thinking about the future." I waited. "You're not getting younger." He said it carefully, the way you say something you've rehearsed. "The house is a lot to manage. And money-wise, we just want to make sure you're okay, that everything's covered." I told him I was fine. He looked at me the way he used to look at me when he was 15, and I'd say something he thought was embarrassingly out of touch with reality. A patient, tolerant look. A look that said he knew better. "Mom, Dad's been gone 4 years. You're living alone in a 4-bedroom house. You're on a fixed income." He paused. "We just want to understand the full picture so we can help." And I said, I appreciate that, because I did, or I wanted to, or I was still, even then, trying to believe that what he felt for me was concern and not something else. I went to bed that night, and I lay in the dark and I listened to the house settle around me, and I thought, when did I become a problem to be managed? His name is Brett. He's 41 years old. He was a sweet boy. I want to be careful to say that because it's true. He was a sweet boy who grew into a man who loves his wife very much, and his wife has certain ideas about how things should go. I don't blame her entirely. I understood, even when I was hurting, that she wasn't acting from pure malice. She was acting from a sense of order. She liked things arranged. She liked knowing where everything stood. And an aging mother-in-law in a 4-bedroom house with an unclear financial situation did not fit neatly into her arrangement. Her name is Noelle. She has a way of entering a room that makes you feel like you were already slightly in the wrong place. She came with Brett the following Sunday. She brought a casserole, which I thought was a nice gesture until I realized it was a prop, something to hold, something to set on my counter, something that made the whole visit feel like neighborly generosity rather than what it was. "We just want to be realistic," she said, sitting across from me, very straight in her chair. "Brett's parents. Brett's father is gone now, and you're alone and realistically the kind of care you might need in the coming years." She trailed off, let the sentence sit there incomplete, which was somehow worse than finishing it. "I'm not in need of care," I said. "I'm 68. "Of course," she smiled, "but it's smart to plan ahead." And Brett was nodding. He was nodding along to everything she said, the way he had been nodding for years. And I looked at my son, who I had driven to soccer practice and stayed up with when he had nightmares and taught to make his father's biscuit recipe because he asked me to. And I thought, she has made you into someone who watches his mother be diminished and nods along. That was the moment I stopped performing. Not out loud. I didn't say anything dramatic. I didn't stand up and ask them to leave. I poured more coffee, and I listened, and I nodded in all the right places, and I said things like, "I understand," and "that makes sense," and "I'll think about it." But inside, something had settled. the way water settles after you stop stirring it. A clarity. I thought of my sister, who lives 3 states away and calls me every Sunday. I thought of my attorney, a woman I've been going to for 15 years. I thought of the afternoon 2 years earlier when I had quietly sat in her office and made a series of decisions I hadn't told anyone about. I had not told anyone. That was the thing. I had sat there in front of my notary and my attorney, and I had made arrangements, and I had come home and I had continued setting the table for holidays and buying birthday cards and making the good cookies, and I had not said one word. My husband always said I was more strategic than I looked. He thought it was funny. He would have loved this part. The visits became more frequent after that. Noelle started bringing documents, things she'd printed from the internet about power of attorney, about assisted living facilities 2 towns over, about options for transitional housing for seniors. She left them on my kitchen counter like homework. Brett would pick up the stack sometimes and say, "Just stuff to consider, Mom." And I would say, "Thank you, I'll read through it." I did not read through it. What I did instead was call my attorney. "They're getting more organized," I told her. She was quiet for a moment. "Do you want to revisit the arrangements?" "No," I said. "I just wanted to know where everything stands." She reminded me. I listened. When she was done, I thanked her and I hung up and I went into the kitchen and I made myself a cup of tea and I stood at the window and watched the birds at my feeder for a while. I had put that feeder up myself last spring. I had built the little wooden post for it from a kit, which took me 2 afternoons and one minor splinter, and I was proud of it in a way I hadn't expected to be. I was not a woman who needed to be managed. The conversation I remember most happened on the Thursday in early March. Brett had come alone. Noelle had a work thing, and that was different. Without her there, he was softer, more like himself. He helped me carry in the groceries I'd left on the porch, and he stood at my counter eating an apple while I put things away, and for a few minutes it was just my son and me in my kitchen, the way it used to be. Then he said, "Mom, I need to ask you something directly." I said, "Go ahead." "What are your finances actually like?" He looked at me steadily, not unkind, just assessing. "Because Noelle thinks, and I think she might be right, that you might be in a tighter situation than you're letting on. And we can help. We want to help, but we need to know what we're working with." I put a can of soup in the cabinet. I put a box of pasta next to it. I took my time. "Brett," I said, "I'm fine." He set down his apple. "Mom, be honest with me. You've been retired for 6 years. Dad didn't leave a lot. The house has to have expenses. And you never talk about money, which makes me think." "I'm fine," I said again. He made a sound, not quite a laugh, but something in that neighborhood. A soft exhale of disbelief. Fond, almost. Patronizing, definitely. "Okay," he said. I want you to know we're here. That's all. And if at some point you need to talk about maybe downsizing or looking at what the equity in the house could." "Brett," I turned to face him, "I raised you in this house. Your father and I built a life here. I have everything I need." And he looked at me, my son, with that patient, tolerant look, and he said, "Sure, Mom," like he was humoring me, like I was a child insisting the monster under the bed wasn't real. That night, I wrote in my journal. I have kept a journal since I was 32 years old. Spiral notebooks that I buy at the drugstore and stack in the closet shelf in my bedroom. I wrote about Brett. I wrote about what it felt like to be looked through by your own child. I wrote about the particular exhaustion of being seen as a problem. Then I wrote, "They don't know." And I underlined it. They didn't know about the accounts I kept in my own name since the early years of my marriage, not out of secrecy, but out of habit, because my mother always said a woman should have her own money, and I'd never stop believing her. They didn't know about the property my husband and I had bought in 2003, a small rental house 2 towns over, which I had continued managing quietly, which now generated a steady monthly income that I deposited into an account Noelle had never once asked about. They didn't know about the investments I'd been tending since my 40s, or what they had grown into, or the way I'd added to them in the years since my husband died, carefully and without fanfare, because I was 68 years old and I had nothing but time to be careful. They didn't know any of it. They had looked at me, at my grocery coupons and my modest car and my house that needed the gutters cleaned, and they had built a story. An elderly widow, fixed income, probably just barely keeping it together. I understood how they'd gotten there. I was, on the surface, exactly what they assumed. That was the surface. The call came on a Tuesday morning, just after 9. I was having my coffee. The phone rang, and it was a woman from the bank, not my usual branch, but the main customer service line, confirming some account details, standard review, just making sure everything was in order. I confirmed everything. It was fine. She thanked me. But the thing was, Brett had called the bank the week before. He told me offhandedly that he'd just been trying to get a sense of things. He'd implied, without quite saying it, that he had some access, some standing, some ability to get information. I don't know exactly what he'd said to them. I don't know what he thought he would find. What he found was a name, and the name was mine. Primary account holder, sole account holder, not joint, not under any kind of arrangement that included him or his wife. My name, my accounts, my property, my decisions. I know this because 2 days after the bank called me, Brett came over. He came alone again. He sat down at my kitchen table, and he had a different quality to him, quieter and a little careful, the way a person gets when they've discovered they were wrong about something and aren't sure how to hold it. "Mom," he said, "I tried to look into things, to help. I called the bank and they said you were the primary account holder on everything. They couldn't give me any information." "That's correct," I said. "They said there were multiple accounts, that it was." He stopped. "Mom, how much do you actually have?" I set down my coffee cup. I looked at my son across my kitchen table, in the house where I had raised him, in the house where his father and I had built a life, and I thought about all the times I had shrunk myself down to make people comfortable, all the times I had said thank you when I wanted to say something else. "Enough," I said. He stared at me. "I have enough, Brett. I have always had enough. And I have spent 2 years listening to you and your wife talk about my future as though I wasn't capable of having managed it myself. And I would like that to stop now." He was quiet for a long time. Outside, a bird hit the window, not hard, just a tap, and then flew off, and neither of us moved. "Why didn't you say something?" he finally asked. "I tried," I said. "You made that sound." "What sound?" "The one that means you've already decided I'm wrong." He looked down at the table. "He's not a bad person, my son. He's a person who got comfortable assuming. And comfort like that, the kind that comes at someone else's expense, takes time to unlearn." "I didn't know," he said. "I know you didn't," I said. That was the point. We sat there for a while. The coffee got cold. I didn't offer to warm it up, which, if you knew me, you would understand, was its own kind of statement. Eventually he said, "I'm sorry, Mom." I said, "I know." And I meant it. Both the acceptance of it and the understanding that sorry is a beginning, not a resolution. Sorry doesn't give back the 2 years of Sundays where I smiled through the folders and the casseroles and the implication that I was fading. Sorry doesn't undo the nods, but it's a place to start. Noelle took longer. She didn't come to me directly for several weeks. When she did, she was different. Not transformed, not suddenly warm, but subdued in a way I recognized as the particular quiet of someone who has been wrong, in a way they can't rationalize away. She sat in my living room and she looked at the oak sideboard and she didn't say anything about it. She said, "I think I made some assumptions." "You did," I said. "We all make assumptions. The question is what we do once we see them." She nodded. She had good manners even then. "I'm not telling this story because I want you to admire me. I want to be clear about that. I'm not a remarkable woman. I'm a woman who paid attention, who listened to her mother, who married a man who thought she was sharper than she looked, and who spent 40 years quietly building something that was entirely her own. There was nothing heroic about it. There was only consistency, patience, the refusal to believe that needing love meant needing to be saved. My sister called the Sunday after Brett came over. I told her the whole thing. She was quiet in the way she gets when she's trying not to laugh. Eleanor, she finally said, using the full name she only pulls out for significant occasions. You absolute menace. And I laughed, genuinely for the first time in months, standing in my kitchen, next to the window with my bird feeder outside, laughing until my eyes watered. My husband would have loved this part. He would have been insufferable about it. He would have said, I told you so, and then made me coffee, and then said it again. I took the folded papers out of my kitchen drawer that night, the ones Noelle had left about transitional housing and power of attorney and options for seniors. I put them in the recycling bin. Then I went back to my kitchen, and I sat at the table, and I opened my journal to a fresh page. I wrote, "This house is mine." I wrote, "I built this." I underlined them both. And then I made myself a very good dinner, alone, in my kitchen, in my home, exactly as I had planned. I've been sitting with this story for a while now, trying to figure out what it actually means. Not the practical part, the accounts, the deed, the moment Brett's face changed at my kitchen table. I know what that part means. What I've been sitting with is the quieter question underneath it. How did I almost let it go the other way? Because I could have. That's the honest thing to say. There were a dozen moments in those 2 years where I could have folded, where I could have signed something I didn't need to sign, or agreed to something I didn't need to agree to, just to stop the low-grade discomfort of being doubted by my own child. The path of least resistance has a way of looking, from a distance, like the generous choice. I've seen women I love take it. I understand why. What I keep coming back to is something my mother said once, when I was maybe 30 and going through a hard stretch at work. She said, "Eleanor, the most important thing you can do is know what you have." She meant it practically. Know your finances, know your contracts, know what's yours. But I think she also meant it in a bigger sense. Know your own mind, know your own history. Know what you built and don't apologize for it, and don't let anyone quietly walk off with it while you're busy being polite. I spent a lot of years being polite. I don't regret it exactly. Politeness isn't weakness. But I think I sometimes used it as a way to avoid the harder thing, which was standing still and saying, "This is mine, and I know what it's worth, and I don't need you to explain it back to me." Brett is a good person who got comfortable. Noelle is a capable woman who mistook organizing for caring. Neither of them is a villain in this story, and I want to be clear about that, because the point was never to defeat them. The point was to stay upright. The point was to refuse, quietly, consistently, without drama, the version of myself they had decided I was. That refusal took all 3 things that I think matter most in a life. It took knowing right from wrong, not in some abstract sense, but in the daily specific sense. Knowing when a kindness is actually a takeover, knowing when a folder left on your counter is a small act of erasure. It took the willingness to think clearly even when emotion made it easier to just react. To plan when planning felt cold. To wait when waiting felt like losing. And it took the plain, stubborn refusal to stop, to not give up the house, or the accounts, or the bird feeder I built myself on a Tuesday afternoon with a kit and a minor splinter. I think about Noelle looking at my oak sideboard that first day and suggesting something easier to dust. I think about how I said thank you. I don't regret saying it, but I also don't regret what came after. The 2 years of quiet, the appointments with my attorney, the slow, careful tending of everything I had built. She thought she was looking at a woman with nothing left to protect. She had no idea that the woman standing in that kitchen had been protecting it for 40 years.